I'm Dr. Ann David, and I've done a lot of research and advocacy around intellectual freedom and anti-censorship work in schools and libraries. We're going to talk about intellectual freedom and book bans, some information, also some recent Texas laws that make it harder for teachers and librarians to do their job well to help kids succeed in school and life. And then we're going to talk about some rhetorical strategies for how to speak at your local school board and make it really meaningful because, showing up in person at a school board meeting with a few friends and talking about the value of books and teacher and librarian expertise is good for everyone, especially our young people today. I'm passionate about books as a teacher, as a researcher, as a scholar, as a mother, and as a citizen. And so today, I hope to be able to give you information, but also give you space to start crafting some ways to speak really effectively at school board meetings. But these are also ways to speak that can be adapted or adopted for library board meetings. Like the San Antonio library system has a library board that you should go and talk to. Because when we think about politics, I know that the national politics like suck up all the energy, but politics is hyper local. And it's harder to get more local than your school board. And there is something to be said for the loud 10%. And the folks who want to ban books have been really loud for several years now about taking books off shelves and restricting access to books and not believing in teachers and librarians as experts. And it's actually very few people. I was on a call with the Texas Freedom to Read Project, and they said between 30 and 40 people in the state of Texas are responsible for a vast majority of the actual bans that we see reported in the newspaper. The Washington Post did a similar kind of, I won't call it a study, but they did an in-depth reporting and really found it's a few people who are persistent and unstoppable. And so our job in this room is to offer school boards who are elected officials another way of thinking and an understanding of the actual community that they represent, not just the loud 10%. And it's not even 10%, let's be real. 30 to 40 people in the state of Texas, like there's 1.7 million in Bexar County. So like we win. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. So I do want to give a little bit of information when we talk about censorship and book bans and banned books and challenges, because I find having a shared vocabulary really helps. So direct censorship is often what's reported in the news. This is when a school board says, take these books off the shelf. This is when a principal walks into a teacher's room and says, you can't have your own classroom library. That's what that is. Red flagging is when a book, some part of a book, is deemed obscene, not age appropriate, and that book is then somehow marked red flag. And so maybe it's a special shelf in the library. Maybe you have to ask your librarian for it. That's a problem because books should be freely accessible to students because the teachers and the librarians have used their credentials, their expertise, and their knowledge to select those books. Bureaucratic censorship is one of the things that we're seeing a lot more of now, and it comes in two forms. And one of those forms is making it really, really, really hard to get anything new or outside of the standard curriculum into the classroom. So last I talked to a teacher in a local district, if she wanted to use, say, a poem that was not in the official curriculum, she had to get 3 of her colleagues to sign off that that poem was the right thing to do. Which means you're not responsive to the kids in your room, right? Like I can pick a poem, maybe something happened in the news, maybe something happened in school, and I want to start the day with a poem. I don't have time to run around and get 3 of my colleagues to sign a piece of paper. But that's bureaucratic censorship. The other way that happens is what's called scripted curriculum, which is here's your curriculum, you have to be on page 8, and you have 8 minutes to do page 8 at this day. And so you can't be, again, responsive to the kids in your room. That's bureaucratic censorship. So they will say, and your school boards will say, well, teachers can get other things. Let's be real. Many of you were teachers, are teachers, have teachers in your lives. You know they don't have time for that. But it means it is an impoverished actual experience for our students, right? They do not learn as deeply as they could. So when we think about direct censorship, those are the things we talk about. The middle phrase, academic freedom, how many of you are familiar with that phrase? If I just say academic freedom, I do want to clarify a few things around this phrase. So schools and libraries adopt this idea differently. In a classroom, if I am a teacher, I do not have First Amendment rights. I do not have academic freedom because I am an agent of the state delivering the approved curriculum. Many of you are nodding your heads, right? So sometimes I hear from different people this idea, well, academic freedom is like, yeah, teachers, K-12 teachers don't have that. Librarians have more space under a lot of the ALA rules, depending, but of course states are being a little funny, including Texas, with how they're approaching how the ALA says the professional standards work. But also the difference between schools and colleges. Like as a professor at an institution, I have academic freedom, and there are legal elements to that. Now, Texas is also restricting academic freedom in higher ed. That's a whole other workshop. Real thankful to be a private school right now, not gonna lie. But I just wanted to say that really clearly, and that's actually an important thing for folks who've not been in the education realm, because they're often the ones who misunderstand that. Well, can't teachers just pick? Can't teachers just say what they want? No, right? The minute they leave their classroom and leave the school and are off contract, they are private citizens and they retain their rights to free speech. They don't in the classroom. And again, people who aren't teachers don't realize that. So I do think that's a moment where we can help educate our community members, our friends, about the restrictions teachers face. That's why they can't just ignore things. They can't just pretend SB 13 doesn't exist. They can't. They're not like, they could lose their jobs, as you all know, but that's a thing that, again, other people don't realize fully. The last thing I want to offer is this idea, and again, if you've been a teacher, if you know teachers, you know this is the thing. It's the quiet censorship or the soft censorship. This is where you just choose not to use a book or a poem. You choose not to bring it into your classroom library because you don't feel like you're in a position to be able to fight if someone complains. This is the most widespread and the most pernicious kind of censorship. It's almost impossible to track. We know it's happening. And we know why. I do not blame any teacher for making a choice to not put a book on a shelf. We have, through our laws, through our culture and our society and our tenor of conversation, we have put teachers, as you well know, but I always like to say the words out loud, we have put them in what's called a moral trap, right? If they choose to put diverse books in their classroom that represent all of their students, which we know from decades of research and reading is really important for kids to academically achieve, they could get fired. If they pull all their books off the shelf so that they don't get in trouble, so that they adhere to the law, we know there are probably a third to half to 3/4 of the students in their room who will not feel represented in those books in the text of the curriculum. They will not succeed to the extent they could. That's a moral trap. I like the phrase moral trap because rock in a hard place is like, oh, what are you going to do? No, moral trap. They are choosing at the level of morality what path to take. Book bans or book challenges are when a political entity, and again, it can be any political entity from school board to the legislature, removes titles and makes it illegal to carry on using them. That's different than a curriculum change, which is when a professional decides we're not going to teach this anymore. So I think an example of this often happens, this tension around classics. So I'm going to use my favorite book to use as an example. To Kill a Mockingbird. How many of you have warm feelings about To Kill a Mockingbird? Okay, I hate To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't think we should teach it anymore at all. Right? And here's the thing. Teachers can look at their students and look at their classroom and look at their curriculum and say to themselves, I am not going to use To Kill a Mockingbird this year to teach whatever thing I think it was going to teach. I'm going to use these other texts. Concrete local things. These are some of the state laws and the recent Supreme Court decision that really are influencing and affecting text selection in schools and libraries now. SB 13 is about school libraries. The biggest part of this that we can influence as people who are in our school districts is we can ask districts not to adopt the SLAC, School Library Advisory Committee. These school library advisory committees are good in theory. It's bureaucratic censorship, let's be clear. Good in theory. Yes, we want community input. Terrible in implementation because it delays purchasing for months. And school districts that implemented this before the state law went into effect saw their school library purchasing basically go to zero because the process is so long that it takes months to get a book approved for sale. Because you have to have the advisory committee think about it, then it's open for public comment, and then there's another thing, and then the school board has to vote on it. It is terrible. Mahmoud v. Taylor was the Supreme Court decision this summer that was focused on 5 picture books in a Maryland school district. Are any of you familiar with Mahmoud v. Taylor? Did you hear about it? So the 5 picture books all featured queer folks going about their lives in some capacity. It's essentially what it is. A dog got lost at a pride parade. A little girl was worried she wouldn't get to hang out with her favorite uncle anymore because he was getting married to a man, but just he was getting married, right? Like these were very, they're all good books. The school district tried to allow opt-outs, found it was too cumbersome, said to families, you can't opt out, families sued. 2 things are important about the Mahmoud v. Taylor decision. 1, it now requires districts to allow families to opt out of anything that does not align with their religious beliefs in the curriculum. Anything. I could sign my children out of triangles. Like I could literally send an email to my kid's math teacher and say, my religious beliefs do not include triangles. And every time she talked about triangles, he would have to leave the room. Now, a better joke was, I don't believe in the metric or the imperial system. We only measure in cubits. Right? Like I could send that email to that teacher, and then every time measurement came up, my kid would have to leave the room. Now, that's a specious argument, right? The bigger challenge is the way the Supreme Court decision was written. It seems like schools are required to pull any book or text that makes any reference at all to queer folks, because that's how the decision was written. The actual way in which it needs to be implemented, though, is just the opt-out. And this also puts teachers in a moral trap, because there is a point at which somebody is going to not get served. Either the kids who opt out are going to leave, or the kids in the room who have 2 moms or 2 dads, or who are questioning their own sexual orientation, they're not going to have text that represent them at all, right? So again, this decision really makes it impossible. And one of the things that is happening to some extent, and again, this is so hard because it's hard to get information, teachers are pulling books. Teachers are pulling things out just in an attempt to not have their instruction interrupted. Again, I understand that choice, and we also know it's leaving kids out, right? It's misrepresenting families.